and welcome to another edition of the Signature Stories. This time, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of talking about the markets or investing or finance, we're going to talk about movies about investing and finance. We're all still at home. We all have burned through our Netflix queues and watched all the movies that we can. There's no new movies coming out right now, unfortunately. So we decided this time around, I was going to go through and present to you a list of my 10 favorite movies about finance and investing. Now, all of these different movies are available to stream in all sorts of different places. Some of them are on Netflix, some of them are on Amazon, Hulu, Peacock, Quibi, who knows? There's all these different services these days. But if you Google around, you can probably find any of them and be able to watch them anytime you like. And hopefully you'll find something either entertaining or educational on this list that can help you enjoy a few hours as you go through this pandemic. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you my top 10 list of movies about finance. And at number 10 on the list is, of course, the father of the entire genre. It's the original classic, Wall Street, Michael Douglas, Charlie Sheen, directed by Oliver Stone. It's a very hardcore, dramatic look at the junk bond corporate raider culture of the 80s. And it is perhaps a movie about capitalism and finance in its most pure form. If you are someone who believes in the power of the free market, if you are someone who genuinely believes that greed is good because it motivates us to act in our own self-interest for the betterment of all society, then Wall Street is very much the movie for you. And even if you don't believe that, it's still a great story and a great movie. Highly, highly recommend it. Although I do have to be clear, don't watch the sequel. That one was terrible. So number 10 on the list, we have Wall Street. Number 9 on the list is a movie that's generally the first movie about finance or investing that I recommend to anybody, clients or just people that I know, because it's both very entertaining and very educational. And that's The Big Short. Big Short came out a few years ago. It's about the Great Recession and the housing bubble that burst in 2008 and 2009. If you haven't seen it, you should. First of all, it's a stacked cast. You got Brad Pitt, Christian Bale, Ryan Gosling, Steve Carell, Margot Robbie, dozens of other people. And it's a great story about some of the people who lost a lot of money in the housing crisis. And it's also a story about those few people who made a lot of money in the housing crisis, who saw it coming and who took steps to profit from it. The other thing that's great about The Big Short is that it features a lot of little explainer sequences where they get famous celebrities, supermodels. I think Serena Williams is in it, a couple other people, and they explain important financial concepts or jargon that were related to the crisis. So not only do you get an entertaining story about how people navigated all this, but you also get a lot of really great educational elements that help you better understand everything that went on. And then at number 8, to continue that educational theme, we have a documentary also about the Great Recession. This one's called Inside Job, and it's sort of post-mortem look back on the crisis, how it happened, how we got out of it, what steps the government did, what steps the banks did. And in many ways, Inside Job is the very opposite of Wall Street, where Wall Street glorifies finance and capitalism and the idea that greed is good. Inside Job will leave you feeling very, very clearly that greed is not good, and that capitalism is a system that needs to have a little bit of restraint on it, because when people are left to their own devices, they don't always make the best decisions. Very interesting documentary, interviews all the major players, really lays out the case for what happened and why, and what are the lessons that we should take from it. So if you're in a mood to feel a little bit more educational than entertained, Inside Job, highly recommended. Next on the list, number 7, this is probably nearest to my heart of all the movies on this list. It's not necessarily my favorite, but it's one I enjoy quite a bit. And most of all, it is the movie that I am currently using to teach my own son about finance and investing and money. And that is probably not the one you'd expect, but Brewster's Millions. If you haven't seen Brewster's Millions, it stars Richard Pryor and John Candy. It's another 80s movie. And Richard Pryor plays a man who stands to inherit $300 million from an uncle he never knew, but only on one condition. And that condition is that he spend $30 million in 30 days without telling anybody what he's doing and without having anything left to show for the money when he's done. He has to literally waste $30 million in 30 days. And the movie's a comedy, and there's lots of clever ways he goes about wasting that money. He buys an iceberg. He plays an exhibition game against the Yankees, or the Mets, actually, I think. But it's all about how you can be wasteful and stupid in your decisions with money. But it does it in a very funny and kind-hearted way. And so it's a great movie to show your kids and say, well, this is not how you should handle money, and to start having those kinds of conversations about it. Also, it's a really funny movie. Richard Pryor's great. John Candy's great. There's a lot to love there. So Brewster's Millions. So I think the only PG-rated movie on this list. Next, at number 6, is a movie that is most decidedly not PG and not one that I would recommend for everybody. But it is a lot of fun, and that's The Wolf of Wall Street. right? If you have seen it, it's Martin Scorsese, it's Leonardo DiCaprio. Again, definitely not appropriate for kids. There's a lot of nudity, there's a lot of swearing, there's some violence, there's a lot of bad stuff in this movie, but it's also hilarious. And it's an interesting look, another sort of comedic look back at that corporate raider culture of the 80s that we also saw in Wall Street. The thing about Wolf of Wall Street is that it could not happen today. None of the things that go on in that movie you could get away with today. There's too many SEC investigators, and there's too much oversight with FINRA and everything else. None of the things that happen in that movie you could possibly get away with today. But it is a very entertaining story, and it's a very well-made movie, and it's Martin Scorsese. And so if you want to have some fun and laugh a little bit at the ideas of finance and investing, Wolf of Wall Street's a good place to go. Next, at number 5, we have another documentary. This one's called Freakonomics. Freakonomics is based on the book Freakonomics, and this one's very interesting because it's very different from any of the other movies on this list. First of all, it's not specifically about investing. Freakonomics is really about the intersection of economics and society, and the way those two factors come together to affect our decision making and some of the things that happen to us in our lives. And to make the movie, they got 4 very well-known documentary directors. I think most of them have won Oscars over the years, and they had them each direct one separate segment. And each of the 4 segments looks at a different way that money and society kind of interact with each other. There's one that's all about the effect of your name and how, for example, there are names that are the name that your parents give you and how that affects the rest of your life going forward, and having a quote-unquote good name or a bad name, and how that affects people's judgments about you on your resume and whether you get hired in places. And so even something as simple as what name you pick for your child can have extremely important economic consequences. Another segment looks at a program that was instituted at a high school where they literally paid kids to get good grades. They flat out basically said, get an A on this test, you can have $50 or $100 or whatever. And then they studied, how does that affect the students' behavior? Do they study more? Does it improve their grades? Do they get into better colleges? Is that a viable option that we should consider for dealing with our students? And so it looks at ways that money and economics influence society. And so it's really interesting from that standpoint. It can be kind of hard to find. It's not always available, but I do think you can get it off of Amazon and a couple of other places if you really do want to see it. And it's a great movie, and I do recommend it. Next on the list, I'm going to cheat just a little bit because this one's not a movie, it's a TV show. But if you haven't been watching Succession on HBO, it's a fantastic look at money and culture and class and the way they can warp the dealings of a family and the people around them. Succession is about a very, very wealthy family that owns a media empire. And it's very loosely based on the Murdoch family. Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, a lot of other media properties, and his 2 sons. They've had a lot of fights back and forth about who's going to control those entities, what's going to happen when Rupert's gone, is he going to retire, or is he going to stay on forever? And a lot of those storylines are mirrored in the plots of Succession, which is about a domineering father and his children who are trying to find their own way in the world. But a lot of the series is also about the corrosive effects of money, how it affects individuals who have it and how it affects individuals who don't but are in proximity to it. It's a great show, very funny, very biting, a lot of clever satire, very appropriate to the times we currently live in. There's been 2 seasons already. They're going to make a 3rd as soon as they're able to get back to filming. So if you have HBO, Succession, check it out. It's a great show. Next, we have one more documentary that's called The Ascent of Money. This was put together by a man named Niall Ferguson, who wrote the book, The Ascent of Money. And this one basically traces the entire history of money, from Sumerian tablets all the way up to Bitcoin. How did we get from a barter economy to a currency economy? And how is it that we live in a society where you can exchange a little sheet of paper with some pictures on it for goods and services that you need to survive? So it's the entire history of money, which is actually quite a bit more fascinating than it sounds. It looks at all kinds of examples through history. And it's a really, really great story if you just want to educate yourself about the idea and the concept behind money and why these little sheets of paper or these gold coins or whatever have the value that they do. Next, at number 2, one more movie about the Great Recession, and this one's probably the least known movie on the list. This one's called Margin Call. Margin Call takes place over the course of it's either a single night or a single weekend at the very, very beginning of the financial crisis in 2008. And it's basically the story of a firm like a Lehman Brothers or a Bear Stearns that suddenly realizes that the market has moved against them and that even though they've been in business for 200 years, they are officially worthless and about to be broken up and go bankrupt. And how do the executives react and what goes on in the boardrooms when you open up the books and you realize that you just lost virtually your entire company? So it's a very tense, dramatic story because it takes place over a very short time frame under very high pressure circumstances. It's got another great cast. It's Stanley Tucci, Paul Bettany. It's one of Demi Moore's biggest roles in years. And it's of all the movies on this list, I think it's the most evocative of what that moment in time really felt like, the fear that the market was just going to keep going down and that the whole system might really blow up and vanish right out from underneath us. And that may not be a feeling you're looking to revisit, but it is a great story and very dramatic, and it really puts you in that moment of what life was like at that particular point in time. And then last on the list, number one, I will say most of the rest of these, they're not in any particular ranking order. The one's not necessarily better than the other, but this one at number one, I do firmly believe is the best movie about money ever made. And that is true. It's certainly the best movie about investing ever made. And that's true whether you're talking about investing in stocks, whether you're talking about investing in bonds, or whether you were talking about investing in frozen concentrated orange juice futures. And I'm speaking, of course, of Trading Places. Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, Jamie Lee Curtis, right? Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy trade places. Dan Aykroyd is a wealthy commodities trader. Eddie Murphy is a homeless guy on the street who's sort of a con man. And these two guys make a bet that they can swap the two of them in 30 days and turn Dan Aykroyd into a homeless con man and turn the homeless con man into an effective trader. And it turns out they were right. You can. And the movie shows that to be a successful investor, you don't need all that history or that big white shoe firm. You just need to be clever and an ability to assess the markets and make good decisions. Now, there are some problematic issues with this movie. There's a bit of an extended scene at the end where Dan Aykroyd is in blackface. I don't think you could get away with doing that in 2020. But it is very much of its time, and as long as you bear that in mind and remember it, it is a fantastic comedy. It's a fantastic story, and you actually will learn just a little bit about investing in commodities and how all that works as you go through it. I saw it when I was a kid. It's always been near and dear to my heart, and it's a movie that I can go back to and watch over and over and over and over again. So there you go. My 10 favorite movies about investing. We got Wall Street, The Big Short, Inside Job, Brewster's Millions, Wolf of Wall Street, Freakonomics, The Ascent of Money, Succession, Margin Call, and Trading Places. Go check out any of them or all of them, depending on how much free time you have. Now, before I close things down, I want to say one last thing, which is that when I did one of these videos last time, I included a little video at the end of some of my personal photography stuff, and we actually got great feedback on it. So first and foremost, thank you to everyone who sent nice comments along. And this time, I'm going to close out with some additional photos and video that I've shot. Not quite a full featured production like last time, but I did go out a few weeks ago and shoot a little bit of Comet Neowise, which, as you may have heard, is a comet that's now visible in our skies over Earth. Comet Neowise only comes back once every 6,800 years. So no one alive today has ever seen it before, and no one not alive today will ever see it again. So it's going to be a long, long time till it comes back. If you're interested in seeing it yourself, just go outside after about an hour after sunset, or usually from about 10 to midnight is when it's visible. Look into the northwest sky, find the Big Dipper, and then if you look at the cup part of the Big Dipper, you take the bottom two stars, you form a line, and you follow that line down, and you will be able to see the comet with your naked eye, as long as you're not in a heavily light polluted area. If you're in downtown Pittsburgh, that's not going to work. But if you're anywhere, even out in the suburbs, or especially if you go out to a rural area, you'll be able to see it as clear as day up in the sky. It's visible, like I said, about an hour after sunset, and it usually sets around 12:30. So you have that window to go out and see it. But if you don't want to go out and see it, you can enjoy the video that I shot, which you can watch right now. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for sticking through to the end of this. I hope you enjoy some of the movies we talked about in this video, and I hope you enjoy the footage you're about to see. Thank you very much. Have a great day.